Hey all, it is Nikki. Welcome back to the channel where I have realized that I'm kind of terrified of one of my characters. Here's why. This video might be a little bit shorter than usual. I'm not sure. It's just been kind of a crazy, exhausting week, so I wouldn't mind a little less work. That said though, I tend to talk more than I expect to talk, so it could be a completely normal length video. We'll see. Either way, here it is. I've been working, as you guys know, on an epic fantasy project that I started like 5 or 6 years ago. There's a character in the story who's been there pretty much since the beginning, and I'm going to stick with my Arthurian theme from this video and call him Gawain. I've gone through phases with this character. Like when I first started writing him, I absolutely loved him, like way more than my main character. I just thought he was the cat's meow, the bee's knees, the best thing since sliced bread. He was like a combo of Peter Pan, Robin Hood, and like Legolas, so need I say more? If that's not enough to make you love a character, I have no idea what is. But while borrowing threads from those characters, I would say that he was always kind of significantly darker than any one of them. As I've continued to write him, he's become gradually more and more weighed down by an increasing amount of baggage. And even though it's been like a very deliberate process, I would say I'm a little bit intimidated by him and by how his character has gone, just because I'm not sure how he will be received. Gawain has always been like on the dark side, but initially that darkness was more like bitterness, like he had past hurt that has made him a jaded character, and he took out that bitterness on kind of all the wrong people. And because of that, it made it really difficult for him to like gel with my main character or come to any sort of understanding with him. And that friction became like a crucial part of the story in the first drafts, and it sort of just stayed that way. The problem was, I was never really super happy with his reason for being bitter or the reason for that friction. It always felt like his bitterness was disproportionate to the reason for that bitterness, if that sort of makes any sense at all. As he went on, poor Gawain went a little bit mad, which was helpful because that allowed me to sort of deal with that issue. I lost my train of thought. No! What was it? Oh, yes. So giving him a little bit of like an unstable, obsessive streak allowed me to sort of fix that initial problem in his character, because it made more sense for him to take like a little bit of bitterness to an unhealthy extreme. But Niki is never really done torturing her characters, so then I rewrote him again, and this I think would be the most sympathetic and tragic and just super sad version of him that I've ever had. Now he's dealing with like memory loss, with trauma, with mind control / mental conditioning, which is kind of turned him into a bit of a monster, plus the impending threat of a fate worse than death, which he's fully aware of and which is pretty much inevitable at this point, so that would also mess with his head. It sounds like a lot, and it kind of is a lot. Like, I wasn't really expecting him to become this. I don't think that was part of the plan when I initially started rewriting the story. It was something that sort of just happened during the writing process, and it's kind of awesome, so I'm rolling with it. I feel a little bad, but also not really. The problem is, Gawain's redemption arc has always been like a big part of the story, but now, as his need for redemption has only grown, like a lot, I'm feeling a lot of pressure around writing his redemptive arc, not only pressure to like write it in a way that I like and that I think is strong, but to do justice to like the depths of his former depravity and to the depths of grace that will ultimately heal and restore him eventually. I find it really interesting, personally, that Gawain's need for redemption has grown more and more intense as I have sort of grown in my understanding of God's redemptive work for us. When I first wrote the story, I understood the gospel, the key points of redemptive history. I incorporated them into the story. But now, looking back on that original model for the story, I think that my understanding was patchy in places or underdeveloped in places, which makes sense. Like, I was 5 or 6 years younger than I am now. I've learned a lot since then, and I've come to like appreciate even more, as we should, how radical God's love for us is and what he did through Christ on the cross. And I just find it really cool that my personal theological journey has been kind of happening in tandem with Gawain's journey. It's like God has been preparing and equipping me to write this redemptive arc more accurately and powerfully and meaningfully. And I mean, if I waited another 10, 20 years, I'm sure it would be even more accurate and meaningful and powerful, but this is where I'm at right now. We're working with the understanding that we have. I think that might be a big part of the reason why I'm so intimidated by this character and by this redemption storyline. I can't procrastinate anymore, for one thing. Like, we've been building towards this point for like 300 plus pages. Gawain's breaking point slash redemption point, but also just I am coming to appreciate what Christ did on the cross and just dying for sinners and the lost who could not save ourselves, pay the price for our sins. Like, I'm beginning to tap the depths of that just radical love in a new way that I never did before. I always knew it was huge, obviously, but sometimes I think it just takes time and growth with God for certain truths to like crystallize in your mind. So like, I've barely scratched the surface of how huge and profound this is, but I'm still feeling this huge pressure to do it justice, to write it correctly, and to just really capture the hugeness of this moment, the moment where Gawain's life is just radically impacted and transformed by coming into contact with the incredible love of God as God appears in this story. Another source of intimidation, Gawain was initially supposed to be like a secondary sidekick kind of character, which is not really true anymore. He's taken way more of a central role, not just in this story, although he has really kind of taken over this story in the grand scheme of the trilogy and the trilogy of trilogies. My main character in book one is still Arthur, but Gawain is definitely more than just like a sidekick character, and I'm setting Gawain up to take over in the second book, so he's definitely a bigger deal than he ever was before. And the more I write him, the more I feel like he might end up at sort of the center of the reader's sympathies and attention in a lot of ways. I think he's probably the most spiritually impactful character in this story. He's the one I ache for, he's the one who's just so lost and tragic and desperate, and he's the one who will change the most, or rather be changed the most, by coming in contact with redemption. So that's a big deal. It's not just like a nice little subplot anymore, it's a huge part of the grand scheme of the entire story. It's just really, really important to me that I get this right. And there are other reasons to be intimidated by this character. For one, he's just become more and more complex, and so in some ways I feel like I'm trying to write conflicting ideas, or ideas that look or appear conflicting into his character. They're not, but they're presenting a challenge to write, and let me sort of see if I can clarify that. So Gawain 2.0 is under the control of some villains, and I do mean control, like physical control. He's sort of like a puppet, they can make him do bad things, and because of that, he has basically just given up on resisting evil. He just, okay, I guess this is what I am. He's completely resigned to it. He's not fighting back. It's understandable in the sense that yes, he is being controlled, but the principle of it is that he is accepted that he's a bad person, and that'll just never change. Like, I'll just, whatever, that's what I am. And so that's not okay. I need Gawain to learn that we are never given the option of just like accepting sin and being okay with our sin because it's hard to resist. We have a responsibility to resist sin and move toward good. On one hand, that's what I'm trying to teach him. But at the same time, while I'm trying to teach him not to give up on the fight against evil, I also need to bring him to the breaking point where he does give up, but in the sense that he surrenders it all to God. And so those two things can be reconciled. It's just a little bit of a challenge to do it clearly in a way that will make sense to the reader. The beauty of it is, I have a roadmap for redemption in the Bible, so there's relief in knowing that I can just go to the Word and find it all spelled out for me there. And I have every confidence that God will help me to properly write those two ideas into his character, like the idea for one that we have a responsibility to resist evil and to do good, but that we also can't do that on our own, and that we first need to surrender to God, and then Christ will equip us and strengthen us to do that fighting against evil. Gawain will get there eventually. His is like a slow-burning redemption story, which is probably why I like it, because it's not neat and tidy, it's raw, it's painful, there's going to be a lot of backsliding and failure and discouragement that happens, but he will get there, and he will be stronger because of all the torture and pain that I'm putting him through. So you're welcome, Gawain. And at the end of the day, my nerves surrounding this character just mean that I will have to rely more heavily on God for guidance and inspiration as I write it, which is only a good thing. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like and subscribe and comment below with a confession of your own. Has there ever been a point in a story that you have hesitated to write out of fear that you might not do it justice? That is all from me, but as always, do not forget to spend some time in the clouds today.